I felt the crushing weight of the tires shatter my ribs, my sister's hollow laughter echoing from the pristine Bentley as my vision faded to black. That was my reward for playing the devoted sibling, for sacrificing my reputation, so Harper could secure the school's untouchable valedictorian. But when I opened my eyes, the suffocating asphalt was gone. I was staring at the junior year seating chart. I had a second chance. This time, I'm not playing the villain in her twisted romance. The smell of dry erase markers and cheap vanilla body mist hit my senses like a physical blow. I gasped, my hands flying to my chest. My ribs weren't broken. My lungs weren't pierced. I was sitting at a scratched wooden desk, the afternoon sun streaming through the expansive windows of Oak Ridge High. I blinked, my vision swimming into focus. Standing at the front of the room was Mr. Harrison, his signature tweed jacket smelling faintly of stale coffee. He was holding the clipboard, the dreaded clipboard. "All right, juniors," Mr. Harrison's nasal voice droned, cutting through the low hum of student chatter. "Seating arrangements for the semester. When I call your name, you will come up and select your desk. And no, you cannot change it later." A sharp, perfectly manicured nail dug into my forearm. I flinched, turning my head to see my twin sister Harper. She looked exactly as she had, at 16 wide, innocent hazel eyes, a perfectly crafted pout, and a halo of golden blonde curls that made her look like a Renaissance angel. It was the face that had convinced our parents, David and Sarah, that I was a pathological liar. It was the face that had smiled from the passenger seat of Liam Prescott's car while I was left to die in the rain. "Chloe," Harper whispered, her voice a sugary hiss. "Remember the plan. You have to pick the seat next to Liam. If you don't, Madison will take it, and my life will literally be ruined." I stared at her. The sheer audacity of her entitlement was suffocating, yet entirely familiar. In my previous life, I had done exactly what she asked. Harper had cried for 3 days leading up to the start of junior year, claiming her social anxiety was too severe to sit next to the heir of Prescott Industries. She begged me to take the seat to act as her proxy. I was supposed to slip him the notes she wrote, leave the snacks she bought in his locker, and slowly talk her up. But Liam Prescott was notoriously cold, fiercely private, and despised sycophants. When I constantly invaded his space on Harper's behalf, he grew to loathe me. Worse, the school's reigning Queen Bee, Madison Reed, viewed me as a threat. Madison terrorized me daily, while Harper watched from a safe distance, playing the sweet, oblivious angel. When the bullying reached a boiling point, Harper publicly denounced me, claiming I was obsessed with Liam and that she had tried to stop my stalking. I was expelled, disowned by my parents to save face, and eventually hounded into a fatal accident by Liam's overzealous security and Madison's cruel lackeys. "Chloe, are you listening to me?" Harper pinched my arm harder. "He's right there." I looked toward the third row. Liam Prescott was already seated. He was staring out the window, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, his dark hair falling effortlessly over his forehead. He radiated an aura of untouchable wealth and icy indifference. "I hear you, Harper," I said, my voice shockingly steady. I pulled my arm out of her grasp. "I'm just not doing it." Harper's eyes widened in genuine shock. The angelic mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the petulant child beneath. "What do you mean you're not doing it? You promised Mom said you have to help me this year." "Mom isn't here," I replied coldly. "Chloe Evans," Mr. Harrison called out, tapping his pen against the whiteboard. You have second pick. Choose your seat. I stood up. My legs felt slightly numb, the phantom pain of my past death still lingering in my nerve endings, but my mind had never been clearer. I walked to the front of the classroom. The seating chart was a massive grid on the smartboard. I felt the heavy, expectant gaze of my sister burning into my back. I knew exactly what everyone expected. I was the obedient, slightly plainer twin, the shadow, the stepping stone. I picked up the stylus. My hand hovered over the empty square right next to Liam Prescott. From the corner of my eye, I saw Liam tense slightly, his dark eyes shifting toward me with preemptive annoyance. He was already preparing to shut me down. Instead of tapping the box beside him, I dragged the stylus to the absolute furthest corner of the classroom. The back row next to the radiator, beside a quiet, perpetually exhausted boy named Noah Gallagher, who spent all of his time sketching. I tapped the screen. Chloe Evans locked into the back corner. A collective murmur rippled through the classroom. Even Mr. Harrison raised an eyebrow. The back corner, Miss Evans. Are you sure you're a straight-A student? I like the view, Mr. Harrison, I said calmly. I turned around and walked down the aisle, completely bypassing Liam's row. I didn't even glance in his direction. As I slid into my new seat, I looked across the room at Harper. Her face was flushed with a mixture of rage and panic. Her lips were parted in disbelief. She mouthed the word, why I offered her a thin, empty smile, leaned back in my chair, and opened my notebook. The game had officially changed. The final bell shrilled through the hallways, a piercing sound that signaled the start of lunch. I was barely out of Mr. Harrison's classroom before a hand clamped down on my shoulder, violently yanking me into the empty stairwell near the east wing. "Are you insane?" Harper hissed, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. Her usually flawless complexion was blotchy with anger. "What was that? You completely humiliated me." I took a seat. "Harper," I said, brushing her hand off my shoulder with deliberate slowness. "It has absolutely nothing to do with you. You promised—" She stamped her foot, her eyes welling up with tears. It was an impressive party trick, the way she could summon moisture on command. "You know how much I like Liam. You know Madison is going to sit by him now. You're so selfish, Chloe. Wait until I tell Mom you're deliberately sabotaging my mental health. In my past life, the threat of our mother would have brought me to my knees." Sarah Evans treated Harper like fragile porcelain because of a mild bout of childhood asthma that hadn't flared up in a decade. I was the workhorse. Harper was the show pony. I leaned against the railing, crossing my arms. "Tell Mom whatever you want. If you want Liam so badly, talk to him yourself. I am not your messenger pigeon." "I have anxiety," she cried, her voice cracking perfectly. "You have a superiority complex," I corrected flatly. "You want the prize without putting in the work, and you want a human shield in case you get rejected. Find another shield, Harper. I quit." I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned on my heel and walked out of the stairwell, leaving her sputtering in the shadows. A profound sense of liberation washed over me. I wasn't just avoiding Liam. I was severing the toxic tether that had bound me to my sister's whims. The Oak Ridge High cafeteria was less of a dining hall and more of a predatory ecosystem. The hierarchy was strictly enforced by Madison Reed, a girl whose family owned half the real estate in the county. Madison had fiery red hair, a vicious tongue, and a very public obsession with Liam Prescott. I bought a simple salad and a bottle of water, taking a seat at a small, isolated table near the courtyard doors. It was a stark contrast to my previous life, where I would have been hovering near Liam's table, nervously trying to hand him a lavender-scented envelope from Harper. A few minutes later, the cafeteria doors swung open and Harper walked in. She was clutching a small pastel pink bakery box from Le Petit Chou, an expensive French bakery downtown. Inside were delicate macarons. Yesterday, she had spent an hour lecturing me on how to present them to Liam, instructing me to say I baked them, just to test his reaction, before she swooped in to claim credit later. From my vantage point, I watched the disaster unfold. Harper stood frozen by the entrance, scanning the room. She looked terrified, without me walking point. Liam was sitting at his usual table in the center of the room, flanked by two of his lacrosse teammates. He was reading a thick hardback book, completely ignoring his lunch. Harper took a deep breath, puffed out her chest, and began marching toward his table. She didn't make it halfway. Well, look who it is. Madison Reed materialized from the crowd, blocking Harper's path. Madison was flanked by her two best friends, blocking Harper in a textbook pincer movement. I took a slow bite of my salad, savoring the crispness of the lettuce. "Excuse me, Madison," Harper said, her voice high and trembling. "I'm just going to deliver something. Deliver something!" Madison snatched the pink box out of Harper's hands before my sister could even react. Madison popped the lid, inspecting the macarons with a sneer. Le Petit Chou. How basic. Who are these for Harper? Don't tell me you're trying to feed Liam. Give it back. Harper reached for the box, but Madison stepped back, holding it out of reach. Liam doesn't eat refined sugar, you idiot, Madison laughed sharply. And he certainly doesn't accept charity from girls who hide behind their sisters. Speaking of where's your ugly twin today, did you finally let her off her leash? In my past life, I would have intervened by now. I would have stepped between Madison and Harper, taking the verbal abuse, letting Madison shove me, letting Madison pour her iced latte over my head while Harper ran away, crying to preserve her dignity. This time I stayed firmly in my seat. I took a sip of my water. Harper looked frantically around the cafeteria, her eyes pleading as they locked onto mine. "Help me," her expression screamed. I raised my water bottle in a mock toast, then looked away. Panic set into Harper's features. Without her shield, she was entirely exposed to the wolves. "I bought them myself," Harper stammered, shrinking back as Madison took a step closer. "That's pathetic," Madison sneered. With a flick of her wrist, Madison tipped the pastel box upside down. The delicate, expensive macarons tumbled out, shattering into colorful dust, and crushed, filling across the dirty cafeteria floor. The entire cafeteria fell silent. Even Liam glanced up from his book, his dark eyes narrowing at the commotion. "Oops," Madison said, a cruel, triumphant smile spreading across her lips. "Looks like you dropped them. Better clean that up, Harper, before someone slips." Harper's lower lip quivered. Real tears, not the fake ones she used to manipulate our parents, spilled down her cheeks. She was humiliated, standing alone over a pile of crushed cookies, the entire school watching her crumble. I felt a dark, satisfying warmth bloom in my chest. "Welcome to the real world, sis." Harper didn't stay to pick up the ruined pastries. Instead, she let out a pathetic, high-pitched sob, turned on her heel, and bolted from the cafeteria. The heavy double doors slammed shut behind her, the resounding thud serving as the perfect punctuation to her public defeat. Madison and her sycophants laughed a chorus of cruel bell-like chimes that made my stomach churn, not out of sympathy for my twin, but from the visceral memory of how many times that exact laugh had been directed at me. Madison kicked a piece of the pink box under a nearby table, flipped her fiery red hair over her shoulder, and sauntered back to her seat like a conquering queen. I methodically finished my salad, chewing each bite with deliberate calmness. For the first time in my existence, my heart wasn't hammering against my ribs in a panic. I wasn't rushing to the girls' bathroom to hold Harper's hair while she hyperventilated. Nor was I plotting how to take the blame to soothe her bruised ego. I simply wiped my mouth with a paper napkin, screwed the cap onto my water bottle, and stood up. When I returned to my afternoon classes, the atmosphere had tangibly shifted. High school gossip travels faster than light, and the news of Harper Evans crying over crushed macarons was the breaking headline. As I slid into my seat in the back corner of AP History, the boy next to me, Noah Gallagher, glanced up from his sketchbook. He was usually a ghost in the classroom, hiding behind a curtain of shaggy brown hair and oversized band t-shirts. "I heard your sister had a rough lunch," Noah murmured, his voice a low, raspy baritone. He didn't sound malicious, just observant. "She dropped her dessert," I replied smoothly, opening my textbook. Gravity is a harsh mistress. Noah let out a short, quiet snort of amusement, his pencil pausing on the page. He tilted his sketchbook slightly, and I caught a glimpse of a meticulously detailed charcoal drawing of a crumbling stone tower. "You're different today, Evans. Usually you'd be running damage control by now." "Sometimes damage control just means letting the building burn down so you can build something better on the ashes." I didn't say it aloud, but the thought resonated in my mind. I merely shrugged and turned my attention to the front of the room. I felt a strange prickle on the back of my neck and glanced toward the middle rows. Liam Prescott was looking over his shoulder, his dark, calculating gaze fixed squarely on me. When our eyes met, he didn't immediately look away in disgust like he usually did. Instead, his brow furrowed in a microscopic expression of confusion before he turned back to the whiteboard. The deviation in my code had caught his attention. The real storm, however, was waiting for me at home. When I walked through the front door of our sprawling suburban colonial, the silence was deafening. I kicked off my shoes and placed my backpack by the stairs. "Chloe Evelyn Evans, in the kitchen, now." My mother's voice was a whip cracking through the air. Sarah Evans was a woman who treated suburban motherhood like a competitive sport. She was currently standing by the marble kitchen island, her arms crossed tight against her chest, wearing her signature Lululemon athletic wear, despite never having set foot in a gym. Harper was sitting on one of the bar stools, clutching a mug of tea, her eyes puffy and red. "Explain yourself," my mother demanded, her lips pressed into a thin, furious line. "Your sister comes home completely hysterical, humiliated in front of the entire school, and she tells me you sat there and watched." "I was eating my lunch, Mom," I said, leaning casually against the doorframe. "You were supposed to be with her. You know how fragile her nerves are." Sarah stepped forward, her voice rising in pitch. "She was trying to do something sweet for a classmate, and those awful girls attacked her. Why didn't you intervene? Why didn't you step in and help her?" Here it was, the toxic dynamic laid bare, the unspoken rules of the Evans household. Rule 1. Harper is delicate. Chloe is durable. Rule 2. Harper's feelings dictate the family's mood. Rule 3. If Harper fails, it is Chloe's fault for not supporting her enough. Intervene how? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. By letting Madison pour a drink on me instead. By letting them tear into my appearance so Harper can sneak away. You're stronger than she is, my father David said, walking into the kitchen. He was a corporate lawyer, perpetually exhausted and eager to avoid conflict by placating his wife. You know how Harper gets. She has that anxiety. You need to look out for your sister Chloe. We are a family. We are a family. I echoed the words, tasting like ash. But I am not her bodyguard, and I'm certainly not her stunt double. If she wants to play in the big leagues and chase after the most popular wealthy guy in school, she has to deal with the competition. Madison Reed doesn't care about Harper's fragile nerves. Harper slammed her mug onto the counter, spilling hot chamomile tea over the marble. You're just jealous. You're jealous that I actually have a shot with Liam, and you're trying to ruin it by leaving me alone with Madison. I let out a harsh, genuine laugh. It bubbled up from my chest, surprising all of them. Harper, you literally brought store-bought cookies to a guy who employs a private chef, and you couldn't even manage to hand them to him. I don't need to ruin anything. You're doing a fantastic job all by yourself. My mother gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. Chloe, go to your room. I am taking away your phone and your car privileges for the rest of the week. This behavior is incredibly toxic. In my past life, I would have cried. I would have begged for forgiveness. I would have apologized to Harper and promised to do better. This time, I just smiled. Keep the keys. I'd rather walk anyway. It gives me time to listen to Dr. Andrew Huberman's podcast on detaching from narcissistic environments. I mentioned the Real Highly Specific podcast, deliberately a petty, satisfying jab that left my mother blinking in utter confusion as I turned and walked up the stairs. The absolute silence that followed me was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The loss of my car privileges meant I had to take the city bus to school the next morning. It was a 20-minute ride filled with the smell of damp wool and exhaust fumes, but to me it felt like a luxury cruise. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't have to endure Harper's anxious, frantic chatter in the passenger seat, dictating exactly how I needed to behave to make her look good. When I finally arrived at Oak Ridge High and walked through the main doors, the tension in the hallways was palpable. I quickly realized why. The ecosystem had adjusted. Because I had firmly removed myself from the equation, Madison Reed had a clear, unobstructed path to her new favorite target. In my previous life, I was the buffer. Madison bullied me because I was always the one physically invading Liam's space on Harper's orders. Now that I was sitting in the back corner and ignoring Liam entirely, Madison's predatory instincts locked entirely onto my sister. I witnessed the first escalation before first period even began. I was at my locker swapping out my English binder for AP chemistry when I heard the unmistakable sound of books hitting the linoleum floor. I closed my locker door to see Harper scrambling on her hands and knees in the middle of the crowded corridor. Madison and her 2 lackeys, Chloe and Taylor, were standing over her. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Madison purred, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. She nudged Harper's AP biology textbook with the toe of her designer loafer. "I didn't see you down there, Harper. You're just so small and insignificant without your guard dog." Harper's face was beet red. She looked frantically around the hallway, her eyes searching the crowd. When her gaze landed on me, standing 50 feet away, a flash of relief crossed her features. She expected me to drop my bag and run to her rescue. She expected me to shove Madison take the detention and help her gather her things. I simply adjusted the strap of my backpack, turned my back, and walked toward the science wing. The AP chemistry lab was a sanctuary of logic and rules, a place where reactions were predictable and perfectly balanced. I took my assigned seat at one of the black slate tables near the back. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Liam Prescott walked in. He looked immaculate, as always. He wore a crisp, dark blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing expensive, understated silver watch. He carried an air of quiet authority that naturally parted the crowd of high schoolers. Our teacher, Mr. Vance, wait no, Mr. Harrison, had mentioned a substitute. A strict, no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Gable stood at the front of the room. She clapped her hands sharply, demanding silence. "All right, settle down," Mrs. Gable announced, adjusting her glasses. "Your regular teacher left me a very specific syllabus. Today we are beginning the semester-long titration and thermodynamics project. This will account for 30% of your final grade." A collective groan rippled through the classroom. "Quiet," she snapped. "Because this is a high-stakes project, you will not be choosing your partners. I have drawn names randomly from a hat. When I call your pair, you will move to a shared lab station for the rest of the semester." She began reading off the list. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, uncapped my pen, and waited. I didn't care who I was paired with, as long as it wasn't someone who expected me to do all the work. "Noah Gallagher, you are with Sarah Jenkins. Madison Reed, you are with Tyler Lockwood. Harper Evans," Mrs. Gable paused, squinting at the paper, "you are with Bradley Higgins." I heard a sharp intake of breath from the front row. Harper had been praying for a miracle, hoping the universe would magically pair her with Liam. Instead, she got Bradley, a notoriously lazy kid who slept through most lectures. "And finally," Mrs. Gable said, dropping the list onto her desk, "Chloe Evans, you are with Liam Prescott. Take your stations, people." The classroom went dead silent. I froze the cap of my pen, slipping from my fingers and clattering onto the desk. No, this had to be a joke. In my previous life, I had been paired with Bradley, and Harper had been paired with Madison's friend, which led to a semester of psychological torture for me. Liam had been paired with a quiet girl who ended up transferring schools. This was a massive deviation. The butterfly effect of me simply moving my seat and refusing to act as a proxy had completely rewritten the timeline. I slowly turned my head. Liam was already looking at me. His expression was unreadable, a mask of aristocratic indifference, but his dark eyes were intense. He picked up his expensive leather messenger bag and walked smoothly toward my table in the back row. As he passed Harper's desk, I saw my sister's face. She looked like she was going to be physically sick. Her knuckles were white from gripping the edge of her desk, her eyes wide with a mixture of betrayal and raw jealousy. Liam dropped his bag onto the chair beside me and sat down. He smelled faintly of cedarwood and expensive mint. "Evans," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. "Prescott," I replied, forcing my voice to remain perfectly steady. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes fixed on my notebook. "I'll be honest," Liam said, leaning slightly closer. "I'm relieved. I thought I was going to be paired with your sister. She's been acting incredibly erratic lately. I prefer a quiet working environment." My pen stopped moving. I finally turned to look at him. His dark eyes were studying my face, searching for a reaction. He wasn't dismissing me. He was analyzing me. "I can guarantee a quiet working environment," I said flatly. "As long as you pull your weight in the lab, we won't have any issues." A slow, genuine smirk tugged at the corner of Liam's mouth, completely transforming his cold features. "Is that a challenge, Chloe?" From across the room, I heard a sharp, echoing snap. I looked over to see Harper holding the two broken halves of her mechanical pencil. She was glaring at me with a hatred so pure and venomous, it practically radiated heat. Madison, sitting a few tables away, was watching the exact same interaction, her perfectly glossed lips curled into a predatory snarl. I turned back to my notebook, a calm, cold resolve settling into my bones. I had refused to play the game, but it seemed the universe had forcibly dealt me a hand anyway. If they wanted a villain, I was more than ready to play the part. The bell ringing at the end of AP Chemistry felt less like a dismissal and more like the gong of a boxing ring. As the rest of the class hurriedly packed their bags, casting covert, wide-eyed glances toward our table in the back, I meticulously organized my binders. I didn't rush. Rushing was a sign of anxiety, and I had left my anxiety buried under the tires of a Bentley in another lifetime. Liam was equally unhurried. He slid his iPad into his messenger bag, then pulled out a sleek matte black pen. He grabbed the corner of my syllabus, ripped off a small square of paper, and jotted down a series of numbers. "My private cell," Liam said, sliding the paper across the black slate table. "Don't give it to anyone, not even your sister. If I get a single text from an unknown number asking what my favorite color is, I'm blocking you and doing the thermodynamics project alone." I looked at the slip of paper, then up at his sharp, expectant face. "Fair enough, but I prefer working on Google Docs so we can track edit history. I'll set up the framework for the titration analysis tonight. We can meet at the public library on Saturday at noon to divide the actual lab modules." Liam's eyebrow ticked upward. He was used to girls giggling, blushing, or aggressively trying to impress him with their social calendars. Treating him like a standard, slightly inconvenient coworker was entirely new territory. "The public library, not the country club. I don't have a membership, Prescott," I replied dryly, shouldering my backpack. "And unless the country club has the updated edition of Zumdahl's Chemical Principles in their reference section, it's useless to me. Saturday, noon, don't be late." I walked out of the classroom without waiting for his confirmation. I didn't make it past the biology wing before Harper ambushed me. She yanked me into the alcove next to the trophy cases, her fingernails biting into my wrist. Her hazel eyes were wild, the carefully cultivated angelic persona completely fractured. "You planned this," Harper hissed, her voice vibrating with a pitchy hysteria. "You knew Mrs. Gable was going to pair you with him. You probably bribed her." I calmly peeled her fingers off my arm, stepping back to create a physical boundary. "You think I bribed a substitute teacher with a random hat draw? You need to lower your dosage of whatever true crime podcasts you're listening to, Harper. It was blind luck. You have to switch with me," she demanded, tears welling up on command. "Go tell her you can't work with him. Tell her he makes you uncomfortable. Tell her you have a conflict. Bradley is a moron, Chloe. I can't do a 30% project with him." No. The single syllable hung between us, heavy and absolute. "What do you mean, no?" she whispered, genuinely baffled. "I mean no. I repeated, enunciating carefully. I am not sabotaging my own GPA to babysit your delusions. Do your own work, Harper, for once in your life. I left her standing next to the glass case, displaying Oak Ridge's lacrosse trophies. As I walked away, I felt a deep, resonant hum of satisfaction. I was rewriting my destiny, one brutal rejection at a time. But the universe demands balance. If I wasn't there to absorb the toxicity, it had to go somewhere else. And Madison Reed was a predator who abhorred a vacuum. The shift happened during 6th period physical education. In my past life, PE was a daily nightmare. I was always the last picked, the one deliberately tripped during track, the one who found her clothes soaked in the showers. Today, I sat comfortably on the bleachers with a medical exemption slip I had faked using my mother's iPad signature the night before. I claimed a sprained ankle. Harper, however, was out on the gymnasium floor for dodgeball. Without me standing in front of her to take the hits, she was completely exposed. Madison and her two minions, Chloe and Taylor, were on the opposing team. As soon as the whistle blew, it was a slaughter. Madison didn't aim for the legs. She aimed high. The heavy red rubber ball rocketed across the court, striking Harper squarely in the stomach. Harper gasped, doubling over her eyes, darting to the bleachers, searching for me. I simply turned a page in my textbook. "Aw, did that hurt, Harper?" Madison cooed loudly, catching a second ball that bounced back to her. "You seem a little off balance without your ugly shadow." Before Harper could recover, Taylor threw another ball, clipping Harper's shoulder. Then Madison launched a third. It struck Harper's arm with a resounding smack, leaving a bright red welt against her pale skin. Harper scrambled backward, tears streaming down her face. "Stop! I'm out, I'm out. The whistle hasn't blown, Evans," the gym coach yelled from the sidelines, completely oblivious to the targeted harassment. For 20 agonizing minutes, Harper was hunted. She was tripped, mocked, and physically bruised. When the final bell finally rang, she bolted for the locker room, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched her go, a cold detachment freezing my veins. I had endured that exact routine for 2 years because she told me it was my duty as a sister. Now she was surviving a single afternoon, and she was already breaking. The fallout at home was apocalyptic. When I walked through the front door, my father was pacing the living room, loosening his tie, while my mother sat on the sofa, clutching Harper as if she had just returned from a war zone. Harper had an ice pack pressed to her shoulder, her mascara running down her cheeks in dramatic black rivers. "Sit down, Chloe," my father ordered, his voice stern and exhausted. I remained standing. "I have homework, Dad. You will sit when your father tells you to." Sarah snapped, her eyes blazing. "Look at your sister. Look at what those monsters did to her." "I see it," I said flatly. "It's dodgeball. It's a contact sport. Don't play dumb with me," my mother practically spat. "Harper told us everything. She told us you abandoned her. She told us you deliberately stole her lab partner, the one boy who could actually protect her from Madison's jealousy, and then you sat on the bleachers and watched her get assaulted." "I didn't steal anyone," I replied, keeping my voice dangerously level. "The teacher assigned partners randomly. I am not failing AP chemistry just so Harper can pretend to be a scientist and flirt with a guy who doesn't even look at her." Harper let out a loud theatrical wail, burying her face in my mother's shoulder. "You are selfish, Chloe," my mother hissed, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You have always been jealous of her light. You will go into school tomorrow and you will speak to the principal. You will tell him that you need to switch partners with Harper because of a family emergency. If you refuse, I will cancel your college tuition fund." The threat hung in the air, heavy and venomous. In my past life, that threat had kept me in line for years. But this time, I had already opened a secret high-yield savings account under a different bank, transferring the money my grandmother had left specifically to me before my parents could freeze it. I looked at my mother, then at my father, who wouldn't even meet my eyes. Finally, I looked at Harper, who peeked out from her ice pack with a smug, triumphant glimmer in her teary eyes. "Cancel it," I said smoothly. My mother's jaw dropped. "What? Cancel the fund?" I repeated, turning toward the stairs. "I'll take out loans, but I'm keeping my lab partner and I'm keeping my dignity. Good night." Saturday morning arrived with a crisp, overcast chill that perfectly matched my mood. I left the house before anyone else woke up, taking the early bus downtown to the city's central public library. It was a massive, brutalist concrete structure, filled with winding stacks and quiet study carrels, the last place anyone from the Oak Ridge high society crowd would willingly spend their weekend. Which is exactly why I chose it. I claimed a large oak table on the third floor overlooking the dreary city streets and unpacked my laptop notebooks and a thermos of black coffee. At precisely 11:58 a.m., I heard the heavy thud of footsteps on the carpeted floor. I looked up. Liam Prescott was walking down the aisle. He was dressed casually in a dark gray cashmere sweater and black jeans, looking less like a high school student and more like an off-duty model. He carried 2 steaming cups from the roasting plant, an upscale cafe located 3 blocks away. He set one of the cups down next to my laptop. "Americano, black, seemed like your style." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. Trying to bribe me into doing the math portion of the lab, Liam pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, a faint, genuine smile playing on his lips. "I don't need to bribe anyone for math, Evans. I just figured anyone willing to endure this fluorescent lighting on a Saturday morning needed caffeine." We spent the next 2 hours in near silence working through the complex thermodynamic equations. It was a revelation. In my previous life, I had deliberately dumbed down my own assignments so Harper would look like the smarter twin, terrified of my mother's wrath. Now I let my intellect off the leash. Whenever Liam got stuck on a molarity conversion, I quietly slid my notepad across the table, pointing out the flaw in his formula. Whenever I struggled with the specific heat capacity graphs, he would tap my screen with his pen and guide me to the correct variable. There was no flirting. There were no games. Just an effortless, unspoken rhythm of mutual respect. "You're holding back in class," Liam observed, suddenly leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. I didn't look up from my laptop. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," he countered, his dark eyes narrowing analytically. "You answered the bonus question on page 42 in 3 minutes. Mrs. Gable couldn't even solve that on the board. You play the invisible background character, but you're probably the smartest person in Oak Ridge. Why hide it?" "Survival," I answered, simply finally meeting his gaze. "Sometimes being visible just makes you a target." Liam tilted his head, processing the weight of my words. He opened his mouth to reply, but before he could speak, a sharp clacking sound echoed through the quiet library. High heels. I suppressed a groan. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Harper marched down the aisle, completely shattering the hushed atmosphere of the library. She was wearing a perfectly tailored plaid skirt, a designer silk blouse, and a full face of flawless makeup. She looked like she was heading to a photo shoot, not a study session. Her eyes locked onto our table, and a mask of manufactured breathy surprise snapped onto her face. "Oh my gosh, Chloe, Liam. What a crazy coincidence." Harper squealed, her voice echoing painfully off the concrete walls. A librarian 2 rows over shushed her loudly. Harper ignored it. She practically threw herself into the empty chair next to Liam, invading his personal space with a cloud of heavy floral perfume. "I was just doing some light reading, and I saw you guys. Liam, I didn't know you studied here. We have so much in common." I watched Liam. In my past life, I would have desperately tried to facilitate this conversation to protect Harper from rejection. Now I just took a sip of my Americano and watched the show. Liam didn't smile. He didn't even politely acknowledge her. He slowly turned his head, looking at Harper with an expression of absolute freezing disdain. "This is the 3rd floor reference section, Harper," Liam said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "The nearest fiction section is 2 floors down. You're not holding any books. And I happen to know you track your sister's phone using Life 360 because Madison Reed joked about it in the locker room last week." Harper's face drained of color. Her jaw went slack. "Do not insult my intelligence by pretending this is an accident." Liam cut her off ruthlessly. He didn't raise his voice, but the sheer force of his contempt was suffocating. "I am trying to complete a 30% grade with a competent partner. You are a distraction. You are loud, you are invasive, and you are currently breathing on my notes." It was a verbal execution. Harper's eyes instantly flooded with tears. She looked at me, her chest heaving desperately, waiting for me to jump to her defense. She waited for me to scold Liam, to comfort her, to offer her my seat. I looked her dead in the eye and slowly turned my laptop screen toward her. It displayed a massive, complex spreadsheet of thermodynamic variables. "Unless you know how to calculate the enthalpy of neutralization, Harper, I suggest you leave. We're busy." A jagged, ugly sob ripped from Harper's throat. She stood up so fast her chair scraped violently against the floor, earning another angry hiss from the librarian. She turned and ran down the aisle, her heels clicking frantically as she fled the building. Liam watched her go, his expression unbothered. He turned back to the table, adjusted his notes, and picked up his pen. "Your sister is exhausting." "You have no idea," I murmured, typing a new data point into the spreadsheet. But the victory was short-lived. By the time I took the bus home that evening, my phone was blowing up. Not from my parents, but from the school's anonymous gossip forum. Madison Reed had struck again. While Harper had been busy tracking me across the city, Madison had been busy orchestrating a public execution of her own. A video was circulating. It showed Harper's gym locker completely ransacked. Her clothes were torn, her expensive makeup smashed into the metal grate, and written across the locker door in bright red lipstick were the words, "Stay away from him, freak." The irony was blinding. Madison thought Harper was the one trying to steal Liam, completely oblivious to the fact that I was the one actually sitting across from him. Harper was absorbing the full, unrestrained wrath of the school's queen bee, the exact wrath I had died trying to protect her from. The game was spinning wildly out of control, and for the first time, I wasn't the casualty. I was the spectator. The front door hadn't even clicked shut behind me before the screaming started. It wasn't the usual suburban bickering. It was a guttural, frantic sound that tore through the quiet of the house. I walked into the living room to find Harper hyperventilating on the rug, her phone clutched in her trembling hands. The video of her vandalized locker was playing on a continuous, agonizing loop. My father was furiously pacing a glass of scotch in his hand, while my mother Sarah was aggressively dialing the school principal's emergency after-hours number. "They are animals," my mother shrieked into the voicemail. "I want that Reed girl expelled. I want criminal charges." She slammed the phone down on the coffee table and whipped her head toward me. Her eyes were bloodshot, completely devoid of maternal warmth. "Where were you?" "At the public library," I said, setting my backpack by the stairs. "Doing my chemistry project." "Your sister is being terrorized and you are studying." Sarah crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping inches from my face. "You did this. You left her defenseless. Starting tomorrow, you are giving Harper your locker. You will walk her to every single class, and you will sit with her at lunch. If Madison Reed comes near her, you will take the hit. Do you understand me?" I looked at her, truly looking at the woman who was supposed to protect both of her children, not sacrifice one on the altar of the other's ego. "No," I said, my voice echoing loudly in the tense room. My father stopped pacing. Harper, sobbing, hitched into a stunned silence. "Excuse me," Sarah hissed, raising her hand as if she might strike me. I didn't flinch. I slowly pulled my phone out of my pocket, tapped the screen and held it up. The bright red recording icon was blinking steadily. "I've been recording since I walked in," I said smoothly, my eyes locked onto my mother's. "I have it on tape you demanding I act as a physical shield for your favorite daughter, acknowledging that I will be taking the hits from an aggressive bully. Dad, as a corporate lawyer, you know exactly how this looks. Child endangerment, neglect. If you force me to give up my locker, or if you punish me for not stepping in front of a girl who destroyed school property, I will send this audio file to every senior partner at your firm. I will send it to Child Protective Services. I will post it on the same gossip forum Madison uses." The blood drained from my father's face. "Chloe, put the phone away. You're being dramatic." "I am establishing boundaries." I corrected my tone, dangerously calm. "I am done being Harper's meat shield. If you want her protected at school, hire private security." I quit. I bypassed my mother, walking up the stairs without looking back. The silence that followed me was thick, suffocating, and absolutely glorious. I had finally drawn a line in the concrete, and neither of them dared to cross it. The next morning at Oak Ridge High, the atmosphere was electric with cruelty. Madison Reed's locker vandalism had sent a clear message to the student body: Harper Evans was open season. Because I had completely detached from her, Harper walked into the building alone. She looked terrified, her shoulders hunched, her eyes darting frantically at every passing student. I watched from a distance as she navigated the hallway, clutching her binders to her chest. People pointed, some laughed. A sophomore accidentally bumped into her, sending her notebooks crashing to the floor. No one helped her pick them up. By the time lunch rolled around, Harper was visibly cracking. Her perfectly curated angelic persona had melted away, leaving a desperate cornered animal. I took my usual seat at the small table near the courtyard doors, opening my container of sushi. I watched the cafeteria doors swing open. Harper walked in, her face pale. She saw Madison sitting at her throne-like table in the center, flanked by her sycophants. Madison made a show of laughing loudly and pointing a French fry directly at Harper. Panic overtook reason. Harper needed a sanctuary, a place where Madison wouldn't dare touch her. Her eyes locked onto Liam Prescott's table. Liam was sitting with his lacrosse teammates, reading a thick novel, projecting his usual aura of untouchable wealth. In a move of pure, unadulterated desperation, Harper practically ran toward his table. "Liam, please," Harper begged, her voice carrying over the din of the cafeteria. She grabbed the back of the empty chair next to him. "Can I sit here just for today, please?" The cafeteria went dead silent. Everyone watched, waiting for the execution. Liam didn't look up from his book. He simply turned the page. "No." "Please," Harper sobbed, her knuckles white as she gripped the chair. "Madison is going to kill me. You're the only one she won't cross. If I sit with you, she'll back off." Liam finally raised his eyes. The sheer coldness in his gaze made even my breath catch from across the room. "Your social ineptitude is not my problem, Harper," Liam said, his voice carrying the lethal weight of absolute indifference. "I told you at the library not to invade my space. You are currently invading my space. Remove your hands from that chair, or I will have security remove you from the campus." The rejection was absolute. It wasn't a teenage brush-off. It was a corporate dismissal. Madison Reed erupted into cruel, hysterical laughter, followed closely by half the cafeteria. Harper stood frozen, completely decimated. She looked at Liam, then at Madison, and finally, she looked at me. I took a slow bite of my sushi, completely unbothered. Harper let out a choked cry, dropped her tray on the floor, and ran out of the cafeteria for the second time that week. The weeks following the cafeteria incident were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Madison Reed relentlessly tormented Harper, completely dismantling my sister's social standing. Harper's grades plummeted, her hair lost its pristine curl, and her anxiety was no longer a manipulative party trick. It was a deeply ingrained reality. Meanwhile, my world had transformed into a haven of academic precision. Liam and I had fallen into a ruthless, highly efficient routine. We met in the library every Tuesday and Saturday. We didn't talk about Harper. We didn't talk about Madison. And we certainly didn't talk about high school drama. We talked about covalent bonds, enthalpy, and thermodynamic shifts. We were a machine and our project was flawless. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind, and Harper was backed entirely into a corner. With the massive AP chemistry project deadline looming just 2 days away, Harper was failing. Her partner Bradley had contributed absolutely nothing, and Harper lacked the fundamental intelligence to carry the thermodynamics lab on her own. She was looking at a solid F, which would tank her GPA and ruin her chances at the Ivy League schools my mother had bragged about for years. I knew she was going to cheat. In my past life, Harper had frequently stolen my essays and passed them off as her own, crying to our mother if I ever tried to report her. So I set a trap. On Wednesday night, I deliberately left my matte black flash drive sitting on my desk, right next to a printed sheet of paper that read, "Final chemistry data, do not lose." I went downstairs to get a glass of water. I took my time lingering in the kitchen, chatting briefly with my father. When I returned to my room 20 minutes later, the flash drive was gone. I smiled, locking my bedroom door, and pulled my actual encrypted external hard drive from its hiding place inside an old shoebox. Friday morning arrived with a heavy, oppressive tension in the AP chemistry lab. Mrs. Gable stood at the front of the room, a massive spreadsheet projected onto the whiteboard. "All right, ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Gable announced. "Today is presentation day. You will plug your data into the central grading software, and we will see whose thermodynamic models actually hold up. I will be calling you up by table." I glanced at Liam. He looked perfectly relaxed, tapping his expensive pen against his notebook. I pulled my laptop from my bag, booting it up. A few tables over, Harper was sweating profusely. She looked physically ill, but when Mrs. Gable called her and Bradley to the front, Harper forced a sickly, triumphant smile. She walked to the podium, pulled my stolen matte black flash drive from her pocket, and plugged it into the main computer. "Bradley and I worked very hard on this," Harper announced to the class, her voice trembling slightly. She cast a venomous, arrogant glare in my direction. "We mapped the entire specific heat capacity shift." She double-clicked the file labeled final_lab_data.exe. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand. The projector screen flashed bright blue. The data didn't load. Instead, a massive, unclosable pop-up window materialized on the smartboard, taking up the entire screen. In huge, bold, flashing neon letters, the screen read, "Plagiarism. Detected this drive belongs to Chloe Evans. All data corrupted." Underneath the text, a looped, highly compressed audio file began playing at maximum volume through the classroom speakers. It was a recording of a cartoon clown horn blaring repeatedly. Honk, honk, honk. The classroom erupted. Half the students gasped. The other half started laughing hysterically. Madison Reed practically fell out of her chair, clapping her hands in sheer delight. Harper stood at the podium, paralyzed with horror. Her face cycled through shades of red, white, and purple. She violently clicked the mouse, trying to close the window, but I had coded the executable file to lock the desktop until the computer was manually rebooted. "Miss Evans!" Mrs. Gable shouted over the blaring clown horns. "What is the meaning of this? It's a mistake!" Harper shrieked, tears instantly flooding her eyes. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "She set me up. Chloe hacked my project." Liam slowly stood up from his chair. The entire room fell silent, save for the obnoxious honk-honk of the speakers. "Actually, Mrs. Gable," Liam said, his voice cutting through the chaos with absolute freezing authority, "Chloe and I submitted our actual encrypted data to your digital inbox at exactly 6 a.m. this morning. You can verify the timestamp." Mrs. Gable frowned, pulling out her iPad. "Yes, Mr. Prescott, I see it here." Liam turned his dark, calculating gaze onto Harper, who looked like she was about to faint. Chloe anticipated that her sister might attempt academic theft, given Harper's lack of competence in this subject. It appears Chloe was correct. Harper stole a decoy drive from Chloe's bedroom. "That's a lie!" Harper screamed, completely losing her grip on reality. "It's a fact," I said, remaining seated. "And since you clearly don't have any actual lab data of your own to present, Harper, I think we both know what grade you're getting." Mrs. Gable was furious. She marched over to the computer, ripped the flash drive out of the port, and silenced the clown horn. The abrupt quiet in the room was devastating. Harper Evans. Mrs. Gable said, her voice shaking with anger. "You will pack your things and report to the principal's office immediately. You are receiving a 0 for this project, and I will be recommending academic suspension." Harper's legs gave out. She collapsed onto her knees right there at the front of the classroom. her hands covering her face, as loud, ugly sobs wrecked her body. She had tried to play the predator, but she had walked directly into a steel trap. I didn't feel an ounce of pity. I simply turned back to Liam, who was watching me with a look of profound, undeniable respect. The king of Oak Ridge High had just witnessed a public execution, and he knew exactly who was holding the axe. The fallout from the AP chemistry disaster wasn't just a storm. It was a devastating hurricane that leveled the entire Evans household. When I walked through the front door that afternoon, the atmosphere was suffocatingly grim. My father was sitting on the leather sofa, his head buried in his hands, completely stripped of his usual corporate arrogance. My mother was standing by the window, staring blankly out at the manicured lawn. Harper wasn't even in the room. She had been banished to her bedroom, stripped of her phone, her laptop, and her precious social life. Academic suspension. My father said, his voice hollow. He didn't even look up at me. 2 weeks. A permanent mark on her transcript. The principal said the only reason she isn't facing immediate expulsion is because she didn't technically hack the school's server, she just stole from another student. "And you let her take the fall," Sarah whispered, turning toward me. Her eyes were devoid of the fiery rage from before. Now they only held a bitter, defeated resentment. "You set that trap deliberately, Chloe. You wanted to destroy your sister. I protected my intellectual property." I replied, my voice steady, feeling no need to apologize for my survival instincts. "I warned you both that I was done playing her scapegoat. She made the choice to walk into my room and steal my work. Her actions, her consequences." Sarah opened her mouth to argue, but David raised a hand, silencing her. "Enough, Sarah. We can't spin this. The school has the confession, and they know Chloe's project was submitted hours before the incident. We have to look at alternative colleges for Harper. The Ivy League dream is dead." I didn't stay to listen to the rest of their mourning. I walked upstairs, passing Harper's closed door. I could hear muffled rhythmic sobbing from the other side. In another life, those tears would have broken my heart. I would have taken the blame, sacrificed my own reputation, and let her shine. This time the sound was nothing more than background noise. I walked into my room, locked the door, and slept more soundly than I had in 2 lifetimes. When I returned to Oak Ridge High on Monday, the ecosystem had permanently shifted. With Harper gone on suspension and thoroughly disgraced, she was officially a ghost. Madison Reed, having successfully eliminated her primary target, seemed to realize that I was the one who had actually orchestrated the checkmate. During lunch, Madison confidently strutted over to my isolated table by the courtyard doors. She slammed her perfectly manicured hands down on the plastic surface, leaning in with a conspiratorial smirk. "I have to admit, Evans, I underestimated you." Madison purred, her green eyes glinting with toxic respect. "That flash drive stunt iconic. You're not the pathetic loser I thought you were. You should sit with us today. We need someone with actual teeth at our table." I looked at Madison. I saw the vicious, insecure girl who had terrorized me to the point of a fatal accident in my past life. I didn't feel fear. I didn't even feel anger. I just felt profound exhaustion at how small and pathetic her world really was. "I'm not interested in your table, Madison," I said smoothly, packing up my sushi container. "And I don't play in your minor leagues. Keep away from me." Madison's smirk vanished, replaced by an ugly snarl. "You think you're better than me?" "I know I am," I replied, standing up and sliding my backpack over my shoulder. Because I don't need a table of followers to know I exist. I walked away, leaving her completely speechless. I didn't go to my next class. Instead, I headed to the library. Liam was already there, sitting at our usual table, reviewing a thick binder of SAT prep materials. He looked up as I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Mrs. Gable posted the final grades this morning. Liam said, his tone casual, though a sharp intellect burned in his dark eyes. We got a 100, the only perfect score in the class. Of course we did, I replied, opening my own notebook. We didn't let dead weight drag us down. Liam closed his binder, lacing his fingers together as he studied my face. The aristocratic indifference he usually wore had melted away, replaced by genuine calculated intrigue. You know, Liam began, his voice dropping into that smooth, low baritone that commanded the room. My father's firm is offering an exclusive summer internship for high school juniors who show exceptional analytical skills. I told the hiring manager to expect your resume. I paused, my pen hovering over the paper. This wasn't a cliché high school romance. This wasn't a cheap emotional fling. This was an invitation into the empire. Liam didn't want a fragile, crying princess to protect. He wanted a queen who knew how to wield the sword herself. I met his gaze, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my lips. Send me the application link, Prescott. I'll show you how it's done. As I looked out the library window at the sprawling campus below, I felt the phantom pain in my ribs vanish completely. I was no longer the sacrificial lamb. I was the architect of my own destiny, and the game had only just begun. And that brings us to the epic conclusion of Chloe's incredible journey of revenge and reinvention. Sometimes the best way to survive a toxic environment is to stop playing the victim, flip the script, and start writing your own rules. Did you love seeing Harper and Madison finally get a bitter taste of their own medicine? Let me know your absolute favorite twist in the comments below. If you want more intense, dramatic stories of second chances and sweet karma, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next story.